right, so it is now time to talk about our roadmap. And I guess I should share my screen. And let's start by taking a look at Chris's conference document. Oh, sure. All right. Chris is now a co-host. He might mute you if we start to get feedback, so please don't be offended. So I saw Era mentioned in the chat that he had added a new JIRA ticket, but wasn't sure where else to put it on the list. And I think if he just tags it with the Roadmap 2019 label, then it should automatically be added to the list. So I'm going to bring up the list here and see. It looks like the list is a little bit longer than it used to be, so that's good. Oh, okay. Let's see. There we go. All right. So Mohan, I've muted you because of background noise, but if you need to talk, just unmute at will. Thank you. All right, so I see Mario's asking if he can tag VuFind 951. Let's see which one that is. I wonder if JIRA is running a little slower than usual this morning because everyone is looking at it at once. Google Scholar tags. So I think anyone should be able to label things, but if you don't have the right permissions, I might need to promote you. If that's the case, just let me know and I will be happy to update your account so that you have more permissions. I just added it. Okay, thanks, Chris. Can you mouse over the where it says none a little? Yeah, so if you're not seeing that, let me know and I can, I think there's 3 levels of permission: user, developer, and administrator. And it might be if you're not flagged as a developer, you can't do as much. All right, so let me. The other disadvantage to having just upgraded JIRA is that everything looks a little bit different. Or do they? All right. Let me just, here we go. Edit user groups. All right. Mario should be promoted now. If anyone else needs JIRA promotion, just let us know. I'll take care of it. All right, thank you, Sebastian, for the offer of help with the new theme. That's definitely a big one, and we need all the help we can get. And I appreciate the comments you left this morning on one of Chris's pull requests related to this as well. So this is good. The more the merrier on this one, as long as we don't deadlock each other. So I'm just going to quickly run down all of these and see if there's anything that's going to require deeper conversation, and then we can double back just so we don't get sidetracked. I know the new theme is a big subject, so I'm not going to tackle that one just yet. So we also have this user preferences page, which is a really old ticket that comes up fairly often, but never seems to get enough traction to get done. And this is just the idea of letting users individualize some of their defaults like sort order and page size and so forth, and have that stick. I feel like somebody sent me a really detailed email in the past year or two about a mechanism for doing this that I thought sounded pretty good. And I thought they were going to start developing it, and then I never heard back again. So I don't know if that got changed in priority or what. I also, because my memory is terrible, don't remember who that was. But if it was someone on this call, please let me know. And if not, I should go digging through my email history and follow up on that. Let's see, somebody voted for this. Improving session handlers is something that I'm probably the only one who really cares about, but we just had a contribution of a new session handler this week, and I noticed that the way the session handlers are architected is really not sort of in the normal Zen framework dependency injection conventional way. It's kind of more static and messy, and it just seems like something that should be re-architected to better fit with the feel of other VuFind code, and it's probably something I could fix in a day or two. So I just put in a ticket to remind myself. It's not really a high priority issue, but if other people care about this, feel free to vote for it. So VuFind 745, I'm glad Andre is here, because 3 or 4 summits ago, he and I sat down and implemented something, and I think that code just never made it to a place where it could be shared and may well be lost at this point. But if you still have that somewhere, Andre, I'd love to see it again. If not, I think Era has some work related to this too that maybe could be brought to bear. But the idea here is that starting with Solr 4, there's the ability to do spell checking on the main index without having a secondary index, which could potentially simplify the way VuFind does spell checking. Though it sounds like there are trade-offs, and we probably want to offer both options.
There are enough trade-offs that I think that it would be useful to have them both enabled at the same time, maybe, because they work a little bit differently.
Interesting. So yeah, if anyone has a working implementation of this that they could share, I'd love to see it. But if not, I think the work is repeatable. We were able to get something together in an afternoon. I just haven't had the time to go back and try to replicate it myself. So 1359, make VuFind work without Solr. I think VuFind should already be able to do this. Are you experiencing a situation where it's not working?
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
I had to unmute myself just in the middle of writing a comment. I mean, the basic premise is that you want to index some records in VuFind's Solr index to do stuff. And well, I asked you about the default search engine define a while ago, and you mentioned that it's there, but it hasn't really been tested and worked out. So I suppose that changing it wouldn't probably work just out of box. And what I was thinking about is that in case you have something like EDS or access to some other service already, and you would just like to see how VuFind would work as a front end for that. I'm not sure if we have something that works or if it could be tweaked to work, but at least currently it's probably too complicated to do.
It actually should be doable right now. Essentially, there are sort of two layers of defaults going on here. So there's a constant in the code for default search backend, which is used throughout the search module, like all the search controllers and things that support that. So the idea was that theoretically, if Solar went away and we had to change that name, we could change the constant, and then the standard search module would use something else. It's not really an easy fix, but it was just a little bit of extra abstraction for future proofing. But the other piece of this is that in config.ini, there's a default module setting which determines which controller VuFind uses by default when you just go to VuFind. So the solution for an EDS or summon only VuFind instance is just set the default module in config.ini to something other than search, and then it should all just work. Users will just never go to the search pages because those pages won't work, but there shouldn't be links to them. You know, well, except in like headers and footers and places where you expect customization. But I think that covers this use case. But the fact that that was not obvious to you means that it's at very least worth having this ticket so that we can document that fact. And maybe there's something I'm overlooking and there are some bits and pieces that need to be tweaked, but it's at least my desire that that's how things should work. And if I'm mistaken and it's not reality yet, I don't think it's too much of a gap to get there.
Okay, I'll convert that to make a tutorial about using VuFind without Solar.
Sounds great. All right, and I see Chris opened up Brainstorm community call improvements. We had some great discussion on that before the break. I think I have a vision of how this can work. So I don't know that we need to discuss that any further unless people have differing opinions or concerns that they haven't raised yet. Improved documentation. It's a big, broad topic, but again, we've already done some brainstorming and discussion on this. We can capture some of that in notes on this ticket after the event is done. Docker instance for VuFind beginners. This is also a good idea and something that we've kind of gone in circles around a couple times before. My lack of familiarity with Docker has limited my ability to participate usefully in this, but if there is a sensible way to share this, I welcome it. So thank you for opening this, Sebastian. I can link some past pull requests and discussions to this ticket for context, and hopefully we can make better progress than we have in the past. I'm going to refresh this page in case any new tickets have been tagged since I last loaded it. Google Scholar tags, which Mario has volunteered to help with, which takes us back up to new progressive theme. And since there hasn't been a whole lot of controversy so far, I think maybe we should spend a little time talking further about this. Can I put Chris on the spot and get him up here to share his thoughts? All right, I will get out of the way.
All right. So it's become, just as I guess to start off with, after talking at the during the German conference, and also I looked over my slides that I did from last year, it's clear that we are reaching a point of decision on how we go forward. It seems like there's two camps of moving to a more like framework agnostic system, but also the desire to have a theme that's that's supported by Bootstrap 4 is also very real. Finding a way to kind of address both of these concerns is something I've been kind of working towards. So one of the things that we've done is we've started looking into what kind of techniques we could use to make it easier to customize the code, regardless of which way we go about it. The two pull requests that I've been doing, and I have a short demo that I can also refer to if we want to do something more interactive, but I might do that in like a side room of the Zoom so that regular road mapping can continue if this discussion gets more involved. This slots idea pulls the idea from of like blocks from both cake.php and a few other engines that were referenced to us as we made this discussion. This seems to be the feature that we really wanted from all the frameworks, all the PHP templating systems we were looking at. Going this route of making our own kind of solves the problem of switching to an entirely different template engine while also pulling this functionality. So the way that slots work right now is that if you set them, later sets won't overwrite it, allowing you to set a block and then include the parent template so that way you can replace just different parts of it. I think this will be the biggest change for whichever theme we go forward with. The next theme will definitely have a ton of things surrounded by blocks. That way it's easier to pull out just specific words and phrases and parts of it and use and customize things more granularly while still receiving all the updates for future template usage, which is really great. Also in my demonstration that I was working on, it kind of wound up taking a lot of the places where we use layout. So a lot of places in the theme, especially like for breadcrumbs, for example, we have a arrow layout, and like that's kind of putting something into the global space. This is kind of another way to go about that might be a little bit more controlled or a little bit easier to kind of grasp more like fluidly. The other pull request very simply just adds like a URL helper to pull in like the parent template. And we're actually adding two parent template and template path. So I think with these two pull requests working together, whichever theme comes next is going to be much more customizable. That does raise the question, and I do want to hear of how much of this do we bring into the current themes? Because this could non-invasively be added to the Bootstrap 3 theme, albeit not without a lot of work. Going in and pulling out different spots like the breadcrumbs in particular, or the headers, or in the record view, you know, surrounding parts for header or title or description would definitely increase the customization options without, you know, leaving people behind or causing people to completely rewrite their themes every time there's a new update. I think however we go forward, this is going to make a huge difference in how easy it is to customize. As far as how we go forward, I have really only one strong opinion. And I have a couple, I have much weaker opinions I want to discuss, but one of the things I really want to focus on is how we style things with class names. Right now, Bootstrap 3 was kind of written as initially a pure Bootstrap theme. So instead of having like a semantic name for a button, it's just called button, like button primary. Whereas it could be like, you know, cart export form submit button. That's a very long name, but just as an example. I think those semantic names would be very helpful, but that also kind of clashes with the idea of a pure Bootstrap theme. So the idea that I had, and I marked up the board during the break so I know exactly where to draw so that things can be seen. One of the ideas, my approach right now in my head is either for the next big version of VuFind or to work towards for, you know, a version 8 or it may be a version 9. Is that I don't know if they can hear me with my back to it, so I'll wait. I want to start with a bare bones agnostic progressive theme, just to kind of set a good base of accessibility, of writing code that doesn't require styling to look good and work well. Something that has a lot of the semantic names, that uses the slots, shows a very clear example of inheritance, something that gets us closer to our dream of being able to go to VuFind.org and grab a theme and upload a theme and just take off with the customization. From there, I think there's 2 opportunities for how we can bring back in the Bootstrap 4 support, which we should definitely do, because, you know, obviously there's a very high demand for it, and Bootstrap 4 brings a lot of great things to the table. We could make a library or a theme. Is that too small? That's probably too small. Let me write this way bigger. There. We could use the features of less and Sass. I wish I could see my face so I know exactly how I'm presenting. Let me pop over to here real quick. I can't see my face.
Maybe you could turn off screen sharing for a while.
That's a good idea. It looks like, oh, stop share. Okay. There we go, that's better.
Do you want to make Chris Hallberg the co-host of this meeting? I think you do.
I think we did already. Okay. One of the ideas is that we could have a couple files that you can drop right into the less or the Sass that extends some basic things. So if we have a button, it would extend using the Bootstrap themes to pull in button default, button primary. For the facet list, it'll pull in list group. And so by extending the Bootstrap themes, it'll pull all of the good accessible CSS that Bootstrap works so hard towards into the less to make it easier to kind of go from there. That way all the templates don't change. It's just one semantic name, but it includes all of the good styles, is one way to do it. The other way to do it I'm gonna go with this. Oh, there's a glare right there. All right, let's move over a little bit. Glad we have this really fancy video call technology so I can draw on a whiteboard. I'm sorry, I just like it. Is to actually go and change the templates and make a Bootstrap 4 theme that includes all of the good Bootstrap classes into it. So it wouldn't just be cart button, it would be cart button, button, button secondary. That would make it much purer. There would be a lot less custom code. It would definitely make the CSS a lot lighter. I have concerns that would be, I have a concern that it would be much easier, much more difficult to customize that code because of how strong some of the Bootstrap selectors are, although that's been improving. But I do see the benefit of, like with the columns is one major concern. And also being able to look at it, if you're familiar with Bootstrap, understanding the code would be much easier. So I can see it be easier to approach as far as reading and understanding goes, but a little bit more work as far as actually overwriting and customizing goes. That's kind of where I'm thinking right now. And obviously there's more work in here about, taking all the lessons we learned from doing all this work into the current themes without being too disruptive. I don't think we want to take Bootstrap 3 and redo it so much that people have to re-customize their themes. I think I had like an idea last year of a cycle of we do styles like the sandal theme, and then we go back and we break things and change the templates. I think this is the next way to break the templates, but I don't want to break Bootstrap 3. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And obviously on the Jira ticket, we can have this discussion. And this can definitely be the center focus of our next dev call or our first community call. But just to let everyone knows that right now in my head, we have 2 upcoming new themes. A base skeletal progressive theme that people can, I'm just calling it progressive. That's just the word I've been seeing a lot whenever I look into the kind of design that I want to do. And then also from there, build a Bootstrap 4 theme that is pure, that really harnesses the power of Bootstrap 4. And maybe we can use some custom code to kind of mitigate some of the negatives that come with adopting a huge framework like Bootstrap. I didn't see any chats pop up during that, but I'm going to take a breath to let anyone get a word in edgewise. I'm going to go grab my water bottle.
And I'll stand back up here too if I'm needed.
And I'll make the corner of the room more crowded. Does that sound like a reasonable? Oh, we have a chat. Wouldn't it be easier with extend to customize styles without touching templates? Yes, that's the side that I'm landing on, but I don't want to like make that decision for the people who are really calling for the Bootstrap 4 theme. One of the things we needed to define is what a purer theme means. I've heard it come up both last year's summit and this summit that we need a purer Bootstrap template, which to me sounds closer to what the first version of the Bootstrap 3 system was, where it was all Bootstrap themes with very little custom code. Sounds like what we want to get back to, but I don't want to make that decision for everybody. I think that this way would be much more flexible, but I'm willing to be convinced that this is a better way to go as well.
Is class here today?
Doesn't look like it.
So that would be a good developers call topic when he's able to make it. I am far less up to speed on all this than Chris, so I apologize if I am saying anything uninformed. But part of what I'm thinking about is one of the disadvantages of extremely specific classes on controls is that if every template throughout VuFind has very specific classes, and then all of those classes have to be defined in less, and all of that less is compiled into a single file, that's a really heavy load of CSS for every page, loading every custom class from every single template everywhere. And then you end up either having to break your CSS into tiny pieces so that you can load specialized chunks on different pages, or you have this one monolithic beast. And this is sort of where there's this tension between being able to customize every element individually versus having a vocabulary of classes that you apply at the template level in order to define how things should be displayed. And I think there's not a single correct answer to this, but I feel like this is one of the tensions to worry about.
So may I mix it up a little bit by proposing a middle ground? I mean, I don't want to have like every button have its own class name, but if the button resides in a hierarchy that makes it possible to assign it some properties in CSS, that's enough. I mean, it can be just a button, but if it's inside a div that's the cart, then I can assign some properties to that specific button, even though it's only a generic class. So I would maybe like to concentrate on having a meaningful class hierarchy in every page, so that there is like the highest level container, and then there is like sub elements, and those have those standard classes in them.
Yes, that
of
makes
course, there's still like there's still situations where it's difficult to do, because you can like extend the hierarchy further and further, but having some big, meaningful, standardized hierarchy on each page would make it easier, at least.
And I think we do already have some degree of this. I think the layout is injecting classes into the body element based on the template that's loading or something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but I think if you need to create page-specific CSS customizations based on hierarchy, there's already at least a crude way to do that, which is not to say it could not be improved.
There is, and we actually use it quite a lot, and it's very useful. But I would go a little bit further with that, because the pages can be quite large, and they're like on a single page you can have buttons that do quite a lot of different things. So having the like child containers or whatever the proper term would be, also have meaningful names or meaningful class names, even if they're now used for nothing, would make it easy to just use them as specifiers if need be, or selectors.
That definitely makes sense. And I see Chris has just put together a demo, so I'll let him explain what he's doing.
I just want to make sure that we're talking clearly, because Damien, you were saying that long class names. I'm not sure if you were referring to, so if for Bootstrap, it would be something like this. I wasn't sure if you were referring to having multiple class names on a thing or having one long class name. But what I think, Ari, what you're saying is that I wouldn't need cart submit button here, because as long as, you know, this is something that we can clearly get to, like this wouldn't need to be here, because you can always do ID cart type submit or something like that.
Exactly. Yes, of course you might need it for easier JavaScript or like that, or in case you have multiple buttons side by side, like there can be in cart and some places, it makes sense to actually have those. But if there is like a single submit button on a form, it's quite easy to access or use a selector for that.
Yeah, so this is definitely a possibility. The only problem I have with this is how strong this selector is. And without worrying about the order of the CSS that comes through, what you'd have to write to overwrite this particular selector. The semantic button names like this, so this is like I don't know the exact like strength, so I don't want to. So this is like, so line 7, the cart submit button is like, you know, like a one class strength, whereas this is a one ID nested attribute strength, which is much, much stronger. This is the thing I want to get away from. And this is, I think, the problem that frameworks like Bootstrap have, is that when they do like a list group, for example, it's like list group, you know, like bracket, like strong child selector, this thing, and it chains together like 4 things. So to overwrite that, you have to like find a very long specific CSS selector to overwrite that reliably without using things like important or other things that are much more, you know, destructive or bad for code. That's one of the things I'm trying to avoid. And also you're right, it is good for JavaScript as well. And I think it also makes things a little bit easier to read. So the one thing that I want to try to get away from is this part of it. Is .cart submit button .button default is getting fairly strong, and someone might want to come and just use this part of it or just this part of it to overwrite it, and it might cause issues. These are the kind of situations that I'm trying to avoid. But this is definitely an option. I'm not trying to lock into that. I feel like having more of these specific class names would be more useful. And also to address your concern, Damien, as far as I understand it, the way that less works is when you use this extend functionality, it actually puts it in like comma on top of what's already there. So if you extended button and button default, it would add cart.button on to that same selector in those styles. It wouldn't copy those. So you're not going to have 1,000 instances of the same CSS over again. You'll have 1,000 selectors on top of the same block of code. At least I understand, like that's how I understand it works. I've been wrong before. And that's definitely something I want, like, we should be concerned about. Either way, finding a way to like shake the CSS tree and knock out the unused styles is something that would be very useful going forward too.
Yeah, I mean, essentially my concern, I don't know a lot about the scalability of CSS, but is just like if every custom element has to be evaluated by the browser for application of styles on every single page, something somewhere is going to have to be inefficient as a result of that. But maybe it's not significant.
Can I ask a question? So if you don't have those generic class names like button and button default, how would you go about changing the appearance of all buttons?
That's
just going to the button class, or
I think this is, I haven't done this in a while. I think this is what. It would rely on the preprocessors of less or SAS to go about this. This would be much more difficult for people who are just using, or I'm sorry, users who are using just vanilla CSS. But both less and SAS have this idea of pulling in everything else. And like I was just explaining, this goes and puts cart submit button on top of that block. So this doesn't copy in all of that code. And the all part of it pulls in things like hover and focus and things like that. That is where the heart of the accessibility of Bootstrap really shines, at least as far as I'm concerned. So this is kind of how that would look. But this is
still not following. I mean, yeah, you can extend the cart button with those classes, but does it mean that you would have to do the same for all the submit buttons, or would you go by the what would you have as a selector if you wanted to change all buttons? Just button type submit, or what would it be? Because that's again one very strong like selector if you use the element name.
I'll get to the prefix stuff in just a second. I think the prefix stuff is a good idea. I'll address it in just a moment. So one of the things I think you're hinting at is that every single button that we give a custom name would have to have this extend.
Yeah.
Which would be very repetitive, but because it's extended, it would pull in all of the wonderful styles from Bootstrap. And if you wanted to overwrite any, you could make your own customizations like this. And it should compile all those things together. So if you did want to make sweeping changes, changing just this block will then, extend all those changes down. I'm trying to find a balance between explaining how I understand it works and over explaining something that everyone's very familiar with.
Okay, so if I got it right, it means that you will have to have all those different buttons listed in some less or SAS file.
Yes, that is
okay.
true.
Okay, that's the thing. I was wondering if there is some magic somewhere that does it for you, but yeah.
If it's helpful for me to inject my understanding into the conversation, like I think the fundamental problem we're trying to solve here is that we don't want to have button default all over the place in the templates, because that's a very Bootstrap specific implementation detail, and it's verbose and so forth. So it would be nice if we only had to name the buttons once. And my understanding is that we have basically two options for doing this. One is what Chris is showing us now, where we move the association of these button IDs to the Bootstrap classes into the less. The other alternative that I've thought about but don't necessarily advocate, is creating more view helpers that build elements of the interface. So we could have like a button view helper, and then instead of coding the button in, we say, you know, make a button with the view helper, and that's what injects button and button default into the template that gets rendered. And both of those options let us potentially change frameworks in the future without having to touch every single button in every single template. But you know, they both have disadvantages, because if we do it the view helper way, it's a VuFind specific bit of abstraction that has to be understood in order to work with the templates. And if we do it the less abstraction way, then we're bloating our CSS and requiring people to use CSS pre-compilation, but it's maybe a more conventional approach.
Okay, thanks. I mean, this makes the whole thing much more clear to me. So thanks for bearing with all the questions. And I think both approaches would work for us quite well. But I still prefer the style approach, I think. I don't think having to compile less files or SAS files is something that's too much to ask for.
Yeah, I do hope. I think the next few major discussions about this will be prototypes and things like that to make sure that everyone's happy with the syntax before we take on all the templates. I do like the idea of the class prefixes of like VF button or something like that. I'm not as familiar with the different examples that you gave of Mario of VuFind or IXTheo. I'll look into those, and we'll see if there's a system there that can work for us. Another prefixing or namespacing convention that I really like is that for like toggles, you can do like is open, or for JavaScript, be like, you know, like setup or JS, like bound. Having these kinds of prefixes kind of makes it easier when you're looking of like, okay, this is something that is part of the styles versus this is something that's part of the interaction. So I think bringing those kind of prefixes in is also something that I've been seeing more as a convention, and I think will make things a lot clearer.
I imagine in some cases too, using data elements eliminates the need for some of those JavaScript specific classes.
A lot of the books I've been reading about accessible design actually don't change classes. They change like ARIA visibility, and and that not only gives you a very clear thing to check like for toggling and change, but also immediately updates like screen readers. So it has a double benefit of this is where you look to see what the JavaScript is doing, and also it's already ready to go for the screen readers, which I think is a really nice way to do that. So I can't remember the name of the book, but it was very interesting.
So thinking strategically about how to introduce some of this, I wonder if the best strategy is to have sort of a beta progressive theme as the goal for VuFind 7, because we obviously don't want to force everyone to switch themes in a single release. But I would not be averse to introducing some of the new elements into existing Bootstrap 3 templates, especially if that makes the portability easier. And one of my questions is whether there's a theoretical roadmap where eventually Bootstrap 3 becomes a child theme of progressive with a parallel Bootstrap 4 child theme where the templates are all the same with minimal disruption, or if that's ridiculous and not practical. But
I think the idea of having a core simple thing like progressive that you can build upon is a good way to go. Like I imagine these as children of this for sure. And those changes with the slot helper is going to be, they're going to be much more minimal. It's going to be like, just change these words, you know, and it could also be used, I'm not sure if this is the right way to go, but for something like columns, it could be something like this. And I don't know how the syntax highlighting is going to take this. Or like, you know, set like call SM6, something like that. Does that look like valid HP yet?
That looks valid to me.
This
I'm
seems like
looking your. I'm not sure if everyone else has the problem, but I'm not hearing you all the time.
oh, it could be compensating for my very loud typing. So I think this might be overkill of the slot system, but using it to like also change classes of like how you handle columns and things like that might be an interesting approach. I think there's a lot of flexibility that we have, and finding the clearest and the most widely accepted syntax is something that we'll probably work on up through, you know, just before the next major release.
I still think there might be a place for a view helper that contains some more opinionated layout elements like columns and I don't know what else. But I feel like the slot thing is good for things that you want to override in a very targeted way. But if it's a sort of repeatable thing that's happening across many templates, particularly something that relates to the way a framework is used to implement a particular layout, having a way to, okay. Yeah, having a way to define those, it opens up the option of having all the templates in a base theme and then having child themes that just override a handful of classes in a view helper to implement the intent in the framework specific ways. But it also requires us to agree on what elements of VuFind we want to abstract in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And as I think I've said in past conversations, we're already doing this with the way we handle our right column layout, or the ability to flip sidebars to the left or right, dealing with right to left and left to right languages and all of that. We have a view helper that encapsulates all that. So maybe we need something like that, but broader, to cover the main use cases that people are likely to care about. And looking at twig macros sounds like a good idea for inspiration as well.
Yeah, looking at Cake PHP and Twig and the PHP template inheritance really helped me get a handle on how slots would work. I also figured out how slots could work retroactively, where you set things later and it goes forward, but it was crazy. I can do it. I don't want to do it, but it is a possibility.
Did you see the conversation this morning on the ticket about adding a parent method?
The ticket or the pull request?
Pull request is what I meant, yeah.
Here?
I mean, now may not be the time to go deep into this, but.
Just one comment. I mean, I think that whatever you do, please consider the fact that if you use something like the slot mechanism or something to get class names for divs or anything, it makes the code much less readable. Yes. I mean, you can't just look at the template and see what's happening there. You have to jump into different places, and it's, while it's really powerful, it's also much more complex.
For sure, and I know in this small example, I can see that point, that it's a lot. I think that would be more of like a like it would be used in like places like container and like the major like main side column split, but not universally. And I'm still not crazy about the idea. It's just one thing I thought of to make it more of an idea.
Yeah, it's a matter of figuring out the right degree, because if you took it as far as it could logically extend, you would end up in a fully abstracted nightmare that makes no sense. But I think if used lightly at really high level stuff, then it might be useful.
I'm trying to see if I can pull up the demo.
Chris is trying to load the demo.
Then of course there are people who are really afraid of going into code, whatever that means. So they're happy to work with templates, but if there is like PHP module or PHP file that they need to modify to do something, it's like, oh, so much scarier.
Right.
And does it mean that you have to actually override a module or something else, or is it part of the theme, or how does it work? That's not quite clear to me.
Well, my thought on this idea of using a view helper to abstract certain classes would not be that this is something we would intend for end users to override very commonly, but more that this is a defense against future framework changes, that we would design this view helper to be HTML-like, in that it would be like start column, end column, and then what start column does is inject the markup to start a column, which is going to be different between, you know, Bootstrap 3, Bootstrap 4, future hypothetical framework, so that then your local custom templates are actually more future-proof. But of course, you have to then use that convention and understand that convention, which could be intimidating and could be an impediment to readability. But we're also already very heavily dependent on view helpers, so I don't know if that's a huge difference, again, if used wisely and lightly.
That is very true. And I also wanted to mention something that I forgot already, since I saw Chris's screen. So never mind.
All right.
Excuse me while I run back and forth, because I'm sharing from one screen and talking into another mic to avoid feedback. I made this simple demo, and I can upload this, like just the zip files of it, just so people can get a better look at it. But this is how I kind of imagine the slots working more going forward. So here's an example of like feature footer that I came up with. Just as a much simpler example than the header I'm about to switch to, where you see I've wrapped the whole content in a footer slot, but then inside the container, there's the footer content slot that you can just change that part without overriding the other bits. A more complex example that I had is the header, which I'm going to pull up now. David, feel free to describe the physical comedy that's occurring.
And yes, nested blocks are allowed.
Yeah. So
this, why doesn't the header tag come from the slot?
What do you mean?
Oh, I mean, there is now a standalone header tag, and then there's the slot header inside it. Is that the intentional? Why doesn't the header tag come from the slot?
It could. This is just the way that I did it, and I did it this way to so this is a good example of how to that we can enforce best practices. I consider it a best practice to always put your header inside of a header element. So by putting the slot inside the header element, it forces people doing customizations. I didn't know if that was. Is that a question?
No.
But so this is a little bit more granular, but you can see there's the header, and then a little farther down, there's the header left for just like where the logo is. And even if you look in there, there's the header logo word, you could replace that with an image or just the word, things like that. And so this is just a more complex example of what it would look like. So this, I mean, tell me, but I think this is fairly readable and very clearly shows the starts and ends. If this is too much, we can still adjust the syntax, but you can see a couple different things. So at the top, you see there's a start, which does like a a buffer kind of style, versus line 7 where the header logo is in the title. There's a set that way you can set specific values, and I also allowed it to use, like, you could put like an array in there. So if you wanted to overwrite, like, you know, if there's a loop later in the code that you want to overwrite the values that it sees for like what links are in your footer kind of thing, you can do it that way. So this is just an example of that I have, and I can run through this. Maybe that would be a good way to start off the first community call, is I can walk through this example that I made on what it would look like in my head right now to do a feature customization of a theme, and we can record it and put it up somewhere as a good example. I know there's other topics that we want to get to, and I want to eat up the whole conference with theme talk. I could go on forever. So this is just, you know, a very basic example to kind of show this off. Did I address your concern, Array, about the header element? I forgot to double check on that.
Partly, not necessarily completely. I mean, if I was just thinking about the situation where there is this new kind of a theme that actually wants to have a class name in the header tag, and this doesn't really allow you to use the slot to change that. But I guess I'm going too far ahead and trying to find the pitfalls.
No, that's a good point. In this case, you could overwrite the whole header template with your own custom header. But the way that it'll look on the child, oh, I'm not on that computer. This is awesome. Did I not update the header?
So how far is Chris's computer?
It's 3 rows back.
Move forward.
I'm going to go sit at Chris's desk so I can follow his instructions.
So this is the child example. I thought I had a header change, but you can see here like home header, which is like customizing the search home screen, where you set the differences that you want, and then at the bottom on line 9 you pull in the parent template. So this overwrites the same inheritance thing that we have right now, overwrites the template, but then pulls in the initial code. So it's minimally disruptive. You still get all the updates this way, kind of thing. So yeah, if you wanted like a specific class on your header or a thing like that, you could overwrite the whole template, and you could also overwrite it and then still pull in the other things that you want as well. I'll have to think about that use case where you want to change what wraps it and see if, I think it might work with slots, but I have to think of a particular use case and give it a shot. But yeah, let me make sure there's any more questions. Thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, this is, please, if you have feelings about this, if you have opinions about this, please go to the pull request and let me know what you think. I want it to be very clear and easy to use. And also go to the road mapping and take a look. I want it to be very clear and easy to use. I believe.
Just wanted to say that, don't get me wrong, I'm asking all these questions while I'm thinking that, oh, whoa, this is really powerful and cool. So awesome stuff.
I'm taking it that way. So you're coming off clearly in that regard. But thank you for clarifying. I'm going to give the roadmap a refresh and let Damien take the share screen back. I'll see you guys in the comments in the chat about this.
All right, so I noticed that a few more people have joined us since we started talking about themes. So thank you to the latecomers. And just to summarize, we are using a JIRA label of Roadmap 2019 to label tickets that we want to discuss for the next year of development. So if you have issues that are not already labeled in that way, please feel free to log into JIRA and label them. And if you don't have permission to add labels, let me know and I will promote you to a developer in the Jira system so that you're able to do that. I saw that Todd was able to pop in. I'm not sure. Yep, he's still here. Hi, Todd. So Todd had mentioned something that he is interested in is there's been some work at Penn to natively do alphabetical browsing within Solr using some different extensions. And he thought it might be worthwhile for us to take a closer look at how that works and see whether it's adaptable to VuFind to possibly replace our current browse mechanism, which works but is somewhat administratively cumbersome and also has limitations if you're doing replication. So I don't know, Todd, if you'd like to say a few words about that or open a ticket about it or anything else. I am at the stage of being aware that this work exists and having spoken with the developer who did it, but not knowing much more in depth than that.
Yeah, that's sort of the state that I'm in. I mean, I've seen the slide presentation from CNI in 2017. As I understand it, the Penn is leveraging the facet mechanism and using that as a and extending it with some locally developed classes, and sort of hooking those into Solr. And then that well, yeah, that basically, if I understand correctly, that lets them put A to Z browse somehow into Solr directly, which is pretty cool. And if they're leveraging the fasting mechanism, then that kind of makes sense. And they're the way of storing the browse entry is sort of a sort key with a delimiter, and then followed by whatever the display version is, which is something that Damien and I had been talking about, but doing that in SQLite. So I think it's pretty interesting. I think that we're probably one of the sites that has the most interest in alphabetical browse, but I am wondering, well, for one thing, getting SQLite out of the mix and the business of having to statically regenerate all of your browse indexes every time you update Solr, that's kind of a big deal. And it'd be really nice to get that dependency out. But I'm also wondering how are other sites interested in an alphabetical browse capability?
Based on Era's comment in chat.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So if you have a minute to just open a ticket and link that CNI talk, that would probably be at least a starting point to investigate further.
Okay. We do have a indexing ticket open, so I could probably link to it from there.
Sure.
I guess that would, yeah. So I can do that, and then I think that also brings me to. We did some amount of work under the current scheme, and I think the browse, the XML that's returned by the browse indexer could be simplified, but someone will need to do the analysis. I'm not certain that I have the bandwidth to do that in the near term. I'm also wondering if we are sort of seriously considering looking at what Penn is doing, that would probably wind up being a larger refactoring. So maybe the place to put the efforts is in looking at what Penn is doing.
I think it's certainly worth putting other efforts on pause so we can do a quick feasibility study. Because as you say, if this is workable, it then eliminates the need for all that other work.
Yeah.
My biggest concern is that my very limited understanding of this is that it involves messing with solar internals to some extent or another, which may be difficult to maintain over time because of the way solar is constantly breaking everything. But I might be mistaken, and it might be a trade-off worth taking on if somebody's willing to keep an eye on that as solar moves forward. But yeah, first step is watch that video again and maybe reach out to, is it Michael who developed this at Penn?
Gibney. Yeah, Michael
Yes.
Gibney.
Isn't that actually already a downside of the current browse handler? It's tied to solar and could break at any point.
Absolutely, but I think this would be even more tightly tied.
Yeah.
Sure thing, but we want it. We want it so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a trade-off between having a custom handler that's tied in a little bit into solar, but then relies on this external mechanism that has to be externally maintained, versus bringing it a little more tightly in. If anyone's interested, I can say that the plugins that they are using are at the URL I just pasted into the chat, and I will make a point of getting that into the, I'll get that and the slide deck into the ticket.
Wonderful, thank you.
Can't see anything in the chat. Can you verify?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
You know what? I did that stupidly. Let me do this.
There we go.
Whee!
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. I think for us, the primary thing is, okay, we have 100 million records, so the SQLite doesn't really scale. But
Right.
the other thing is that we have like 200 views using the same index, and they have different filters selecting what to display. So I suppose that this would allow them to actually browse their own data or whatever the subset of the index they want to see, which would be really cool.
Yeah. So I just copied in the link to the slides. It does appear that there's a way of using that they leverage the fasting mechanism to allow limiting on the browsers. So that all looks like it has much potential.
And as I said to Todd earlier, I met Michael at LDCX earlier this year, and he's very friendly and collaborative, and I'm sure he would be happy to talk to us about this if we need clarification beyond what we can figure out from the notes Todd has shared.
I see that it currently mentions Solar 6.5 from and last commit 2 years ago. So maybe some work needs to be done to get things up to date, but this seems really promising anyway.
Yeah, it does seem promising.
That's great. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Todd. I'm glad that I was vaguely aware of this work, but I'm glad that it's actually of interest to multiple people, and hopefully we can do something with it.
Yeah.
So that leaves us with about half an hour, a little more than half an hour for the scheduled time. And if anyone has any pressing matters they feel haven't been raised yet, please mention them now. And if not, I'm thinking I will start poking around in some of our past year notes just to see if there's anything that hasn't been addressed that we should be raising back to the surface. Because I think we have a couple cardboards full of things that still aren't done that may or may not still be relevant. Oh, and thank you, Chris, for sharing the demo themes he was displaying on Jira. So if anyone wants to look at that, it's available. All right, so I'm just gonna start poking around our GitHub projects for anything important that got overlooked, but interrupt me with more exciting things if you wish. Why can I not scroll down this page?
I pulled most of the relevant stuff into the Google Doc.
There we go. All right.
Please note
So,
that you're not sharing the screen.
oh,
if you
well,
want to.
that's not very helpful of me. All right, let's share screen. All right, is that visible now?
Yes, it is.
The chat does not display in the share, so you can have that up without blocking.
Oh, that's good to know. I'll make that a little bigger too. So back from 2017, result count indicator for advanced search. I think that was one of yours, Era. Is that still something that we want to contribute?
I think so. I've just completely lost track of all the things that I've proposed, and we haven't implemented that for us either. It was just an idea that I've seen in a couple of different places or different services, and found really useful.
Okay.
I mean, the idea was just to show a result count before you do the search. So if you add filters and search terms, you would get some feedback on what kind of a result that you would be looking at.
I understand. I wonder if we should move this to Jira just so that it's better tracked than on this 2017 roadmap list. Chris, might you be willing to write that up if you understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll make sure I didn't already.
We talked about sample Solr configuration for larger indexes. I think that was sort of a wiki thing. Adding more fields to the loans list.
I think at least some of that has been done already, actually.
Okay.
There has been a couple of more fields added. I don't know if there are any more that are missing.
Well, if this was probably something you raised, so if you feel reasonably confident it's done, I can delete it. And if you'd like to review it, please do.
Well, I can always raise a PR if I find something that's missing.
All right, so I'm just going to archive this one. You had talked about making a clear cache API endpoint. Did that ever happen?
I have no idea. We have it locally, but I'm not sure if I ever contributed that one.
I'm pretty sure you did not. So if it's something that's easy to contribute.
Yeah, that's actually related to another one that we have bumped on several times. And that would be a mechanism to purge a single record image from the cache. Because, for instance, the Open Library sometimes provides garbage. And
right.
if it's fixed in Open Library, you still need to update the cache. And I wouldn't want to clear all the cache, but it's complicated to get to the cache and find the right file to delete. So it would be nice to be able to just request a refresh of an image. But that's actually another task, so I should get around to doing something about it at some time.
That's certainly something I'm willing to help with too, if necessary. So let me know. And then we talked about having a cache location configuration for database-based caching, etc. Anything on that?
If it was mine, let's just archive it because I'm not sure if that makes sense. It
All
would
right.
like bloat the database so badly to put images or something in there that doesn't make so much sense.
It's been 2 years. Nobody's asked for it. We can archive it. All right. So I think then, I don't know, do you think there's still value in sharing sample Solr configurations for larger indexes? And if so, do you have something you could share, or is that done?
We can share, and we have our index configuration in GitHub, so it can be linked to, for example, but it's I'm not sure if it's workable because it's not quite the standard Solr. I mean, it's not the basic VuFind configuration. We use doc values and things like that.
Right.
So
right.
I suppose that links to those, and while I know that there are some cases where not running doc values is more performant, we would still prefer to use those. And I believe that in the long run, you actually can't run without doc values for proper performance.
And indeed, doc values is another long unresolved conversation because I don't think we ever fully made sense of what we should be doing with them. So that might be something else to bring up again for a future release. You know, if we should just change the defaults and make everybody re-index, especially if the direction Solr is moving is relying more heavily on doc values and not having them is to our detriment. It's been a few years since we've talked about that in depth, and I feel like the last time we did a whole bunch of performance testing and the results were inconclusive, so we opted to not change anything out of fear of change.
Yeah, and there have been situations where not running doc values is actually faster, but there were bugs that were later fixed, and I think it would warrant a re-evaluation of the current status. But it's still possible that a small index performs faster without doc values.
Right.
But the benefits come from when the index size grows, and it uses a whole lot of less memory. So you don't run into trouble with having to reconfigure the Java heap and everything for higher memory usage that otherwise the field cache would have.
Chris, do you have free bandwidth to find that doc values JIRA ticket and label it just for?
Use doc values for appropriate Solr fields?
Yes. Thank you. So going up to the 2018 document, we've already talked about simplified spell checking. Chris, do we have a ticket for objectify all JavaScript? I know I saw that mentioned in your document, but I wasn't sure if that was captured in JIRA anywhere.
How about that name? I'll take a look.
Great, and this is just the idea of finishing the project of namespacing all of our JavaScript inside the VuFind object, because right now we have some things that are namespaced and some things that are not. It would be good to be more consistent. Extended configurable autocomplete.
That's probably mine again. And I was to contribute something. I don't think I got around to doing it actually. But it would be useful probably to put it in Jira and be able to track it better also. It's still something that we could work on.
Great, and I think Chris is trying to interject something as well.
We do have the new autocomplete library, but the configuration part.
Okay, so yeah.
Hear you.
Chris is just saying that he's made VuFind's autocomplete library more extensible, but the configuration piece still needs to be figured out. So if one of you would like to open the ticket and start some conversation there, that would be great. Library card barcode / QR code display. I think that was you as well.
Yes, because we have it and we like it, but I'm not sure if we actually did anything about that either.
I'm pretty sure that hasn't come through yet. I don't know if if anyone currently needs it other than you. So I wouldn't prioritize that one highly if it's a pain for you to share it. But if it would be useful to get it into master, I'm happy to have it.
It's not really painful. It's actually fairly simple. And the thing is that when you realize how useful it is, it's actually really nice to have, because you can just forget the library card home and use the cell phone display as your library card.
Oh, that's true.
That's the main use for that, and that's why we implemented it, because it's kind of a virtual library card.
Oh yeah, that's actually incredibly useful. So yes, yeah. I take back my words. Please share.
So the only downside is that it doesn't work with laser readers, because they can't read the cell phone screen.
Right.
But I think those, well, I don't know how popular those are anymore these days.
We still have them.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Still, for those with better technology, I would love to have it. Extra search parameter when serializing objects.
That was mine. Yes.
That was, yes. I'm sorry to just be reading you everything that you've ever said over the past 2 years.
Yeah, I never got around to working on. If we didn't do that, we still should be, because we are doing some nasty stuff with encoding stuff in filters.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not been done yet. So again, I welcome it if you find the time.
I'll try to, but you know how it goes.
Oh, I do indeed. But if nothing else, I'll remind you again next year at this time.
Awesome.
And the last thing on the list is actually this pull request for improving the merge order of language files, which was Sebastian's. And I think we just sort of lost track of it somewhere. So I don't know if I can do anything to help get that going again. Let me know. I'm happy to assist. All right, well, thank you for rethinking, if nothing else. But I do think there's some value in making the language merging more sane. And of course, we also have more to discuss regarding the modularity features and some of the better template loading, but I think we've at least got some agreement around the starting points for that. And my thinking is once we finish up VuFind 6.1 early next year, then we can start merging some of those bigger changes into master and getting into the 7.0 development more seriously. So I think that has about exhausted the list of ideas that I had to bring up. This has been, as usual, extremely valuable, at least from my perspective. I've had some questions answered. But we still have 20 minutes if there's anything more to say. And thank you, Andre, for looking for that spelling code, even if it could not be found. So thank you for stopping in. And does that mean I need to now put Era on the spot yet again to ask for help with the spelling code?
Yeah, I'd be happy to work on that, because it's something that comes up regularly with our users, and more and more requests for Google, like it just works somehow to figure out the proper search term for me. I would like to have that, but without the annoying side of how Google does it sometimes really badly,
For
and
sure.
making you use parentheses where you, or quotes where you don't want to. So that's something that I can probably prioritize to some extent.
That's great. And I'd say, given that we have such a long list of things, if there are any of these where the code exists in the Finna GitHub, maybe as a bare minimum, if you could find 5 minutes to open a JIRA ticket and point at where the code exists, then we have a place where somebody else could potentially pick up and port the code over and make a pull request, even if you don't have the time to do that. That, you know, might help with some of these things like the library card, QR codes, and so forth.
That makes a
Similarly
lot
to
of
how we
sense.
dealt with the SDI stuff, which is almost done.
Yeah, I'll try to work on adding the tickets.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So is there anything unresolved in anyone's mind at this point? Are we at a good point to stop? I hear the sounds of at least a dozen resolved minds. So.
It has been really useful, and I think at least my head is buzzing at the moment. So with all these things. So yeah, there is at least enough work to do.
Definitely, and we have a VuFind call scheduled for next Tuesday, and I'm thinking we might as well stick with that, even if it's a short call, to finalize the details of how we change the structure of the call going forward. I'll try to write up some proposals that we can then talk about next Tuesday, and then go forward from there. The other thing is that the next Wolfcon is going to be in January in Texas, and they still haven't put together all the details in public yet, but I'm definitely planning to be there and hopefully to have some VuFind events. So we might be able to have a follow-up meeting to this online or in person if anyone is going to be at Wolfcon, to talk again and touch base. Though it can be a much more concise conversation than this, since it won't have been too much time passed since from now. But anyway, stay tuned for more details on Wolfcon.
I expect to see you there.
Excellent. I look forward to it. All right, well, with that, I will wrap things up. And thank you again for taking the time to join us. And if any new ideas come, go to JIRA, vote for tickets, label tickets, comment on tickets, and email me if you have any trouble with JIRA permissions. And then I will talk to some of you next week, and I wish you all a good day.